Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. The Alberta Sovereignty Act within a united Canada passed third reading at the legislature. We have reaction. The city of Lethbridge released figures of how many homeless we have here in our city. We have those numbers. And the CP holiday train in support of Canada's food banks rolled into Medicine Hat, featuring a very special concert.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. The legislature passed the Alberta Sovereignty Within a United Canada Act. The final vote was 27-7. Premier Daniel Smith's UCP voted for it while the NDP were opposed. Now, the act strips out sweeping powers for cabinet but will allow Alberta to push back on federal laws or policies that negatively impact the province. It will also address federal legislation and policies that are deemed unconstitutional, violate Albertans' charter rights, or that interfere with provincial constitutional rights. Premier Daniel Smith says her government must take a stand to prevent federal intrusion.
Our province will not enforce unconstitutional or harmful Ottawa policies or laws in Alberta. Albertans come first, always. Importantly, this act fully respects Indigenous and treaty rights, the Constitution, court decisions, and does not force private citizens or companies to do anything contrary to federal law or policy. It's intended to be fully democratic and transparent. Each proposed use of the act will require a special motion to be passed in the Legislative Assembly, which will be subject to open discussion, examination, and review.
Premier Smith adds that the Alberta Sovereignty Act will not allow Alberta to defy Canada's constitution or allow Alberta to separate from Canada. Bill 1 will also not allow Cabinet to issue unconstitutional orders in Council or give instructions to people or corporations that are not provincial entities to violate federal law. NDP leader Rachel Notley is not impressed with the UCP passing the Alberta Sovereignty Act. She says their new legislation overwrites the Canadian Constitution, which is not good for Albertans.
This can only possibly create chaos and uncertainty. And it's a terrible signal to investors that they cannot rely on the rule of law or the application of due process if they invest their money in Alberta. Rather, they will be subject to the whims of a premier with a record of extremist views and dishonesty. We cannot afford to let Smith's job-killing Sovereignty Act inject chaos into our province, because it will hurt our economy.
Notley says if her party forms government next May, she will repeal the legislation. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau also commented on Alberta passing the Sovereignty Act. Trudeau says his government will continue to focus on being there for Albertans.
We're going to stay focused on working hard for Albertans, delivering on job growth, delivering on support for people who need it with things like childcare, with things like the dental care and rental benefits. We're not going to get into arguing about something that obviously is the Alberta government trying to push back at the federal government. We're going to continue to work as constructively as possible. That's what Albertans want. They want governments that deliver for them, and we're focused on that.
Prime Minister Trudeau was also asked about Bill C-21, also known as the Firearms Bill. He says there are a number of guns, including those used by hunters or sport shooters, which his government takes issue with.
So what we're looking at right now is where to make sure that that line is right, to keep communities safe, to ban military-style assault weapons, and to ensure that we're not going after shotguns and rifles that are primarily used for hunting. It's a complex issue. It's made more challenging by the fact that the Conservative Party is in the pockets of the gun lobby and trying to spread disinformation and scare everyone as much as possible. We are focused on going after certain guns that have no place in Canada, and we are not going after shotguns and rifles.
There are those in certain Indigenous communities who are quite concerned with the Liberals' gun ban bill C-21. Melissa Embarkey is a policy analyst with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. She's also First Nations. She says taking away hunting rifles from Indigenous people would be a direct violation of treaty rights.
It started off as banning handguns, and that's what was sold to Canadians. How and where and when did hunting rifles get included in this equation? And by doing so, you're basically going against our treaty rights to be able to hunt. What else are we supposed to use? We rely on wild meat because the food prices are so high. For some communities, this is their food. This is what they eat during the winter. So essentially you're taking away our food source without even consulting us, and that is just wrong on so many levels.
Melissa Ambarki will also explain how a number of Indigenous communities are actually for and not against energy projects. She'll have details coming up after business news. Canada's Public Safety Minister says his staff will review an RCMP equipment contract with a company that has ties to China's government. There are reports that the Federal Procurement Department awarded a $550,000 contract to an Ontario company last year to build and maintain a radio frequency filtering system for the Mounties.
One of the reasons why we put in place a process that looks at the potential opportunities or vectors for foreign interference in the context of contracts is to secure Canadian national interests, to secure our national security. And so what I have done in the light of this report is to instruct my officials to look very closely at the details of that contract and also to work with our officials to review the process by which this contract was awarded. It goes without saying that we need to be very vigilant about where the vectors of risk and foreign interference are occurring on a daily basis.
Well, those brisk Chinook winds have brought us some much warmer temperatures here across much of southwestern Alberta. Angela Stewart is out in the field at Popson Park and has an early peek at the forecast. Angela, how long can we expect the mercury to remain above zero?
Yeah, Hal, we're looking at above zero temperatures until about Saturday. Then starting on Sunday, it will start to cool down with more snow expected in the forecast. As for tonight, we could experience winds gusting up to about 50 km with that wind chill sitting at -14, the low sitting at -6. As for how the rest of the week is shaping up, I'll have all those details coming up later in the show.
Great. Thanks so much, Angela. Alberta's 2 deputy chief medical officers of health are leaving. This is less than a month after Dr. Dina Henshaw was removed as our province's top doctor. She was replaced by Dr. Mark Joffe. The UCP says Dr. Rosanna Salvatierra and Dr. Jing Hu have given notice. Henshaw, who became the face of Alberta's public health response to the COVID-19 pandemic, was replaced earlier this fall. Premier Daniel Smith blamed Henshaw and AHS for failing to deliver the best advice and care for Albertans as the hospital system came close to buckling under during the pandemic. The city of Lethbridge says 454 people are experiencing homelessness here in our city. That's according to the 2022 point-in-time count survey. Point-in-time counts are done every 2 years, and since the last report, the numbers have doubled. A city official explains why.
The main increase comes from the number of unsheltered individuals. In terms of the sheltered count, we're seeing similar number of people from 2018, 2021, and 2022. In terms of what we're seeing in terms of our service providers, this number wasn't totally unexpected. This was kind of what we had heard in the community, so the numbers we received align with what we know from the service providers working with these individuals.
The city says they were not surprised by the increase, and now this data gives them the ability to advocate for more housing resources.
It supports our communication with the provincial and federal government as well to bring in more resources for our community members who are experiencing homelessness. We can certainly attribute some of this to the recent inflation that we're seeing within our community. Our rental prices have increased, and we have not significantly been able to increase the number of affordable housing units within our community.
Of the 454 people who are experiencing homelessness, about 52% are unsheltered. Hand-knitted winter clothing is very much needed this time of year. Volunteers from the Friends of Chinook Regional Hospital's Craft Club hosted a fundraiser to showcase their wares. The funds raised will go directly back into the hospital. As BCN's Micah Quinn explains now, this is the first fundraiser for the event since 2019.
The craft club has been going on for 30 plus years.
Nettie Hildebrand has been volunteering and managing the Friends of Chinook Regional Hospital's Craft Club for the past 22 years. She says all of the items for the fundraiser are hand knitted by volunteers and then brought into the hospital to sell.
The money that we make all goes back to support patient care in the hospital. It stays in Lethbridge. We always hope that we'll make somebody's day a bit brighter and warmer if they get a nice toque and pair of mittens when it's minus 25 below.
The group also donates their work to patients at the hospital, as well as Lethbridge Family Services. Colin Zieber, the Senior Operating Officer with Alberta Health Services, says the group holds a special place in his heart.
We have 4 children. Our oldest daughters are 20 years old, and we bought some clothes for their dolls here probably 19 years ago. And they're still in the toy box.
The fundraiser has generated over $69,000 to support the hospital, along with more than $102,000 sold through items in the gift shop.
It's $170,000 has been raised for the hospital here. I mean, the partnership of our Friends of the Hospital group, Craft Sales Foundation, provide equipment and supplies for our health teams and also provide education as well.
The craft sale will run all day Wednesday and Thursday. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
That is great to see. You know, it's also wonderful to see more than 7,000 Albertans being honored for their outstanding community achievements with a Queen Elizabeth II Platinum Jubilee Medal. You can include former Blood Tribe Chief and current University of Lethbridge Chancellor Charles Weaselhead in that group. Weaselhead, who's a residential school survivor, has spent much of his life promoting health, education, and economic development for Indigenous people. He appreciated receiving the award.
My background is pretty diversified, going from health to politics to education to working with different communities, both municipalities, working with the provincial and federal government. But definitely, I'm very pleased on a personal note, but I'm also very, very pleased, that I'm a member of a larger community, the Blood Tribe, and so I think it really speaks volumes about where I come from.
Weaselhead was a one-time Treaty 7 Grand Chief and is a sitting board member at the Blood Tribe Department of Health. That's on top of his role as Chancellor at the University of Lethbridge. The Community Foundation of Lethbridge in southwestern Alberta has dished out over $300,000 in grants to local organizations here in our city. The grants are through the Community Priorities Fund and the Henry S. Varley Fund. The money will be distributed to 33 projects from organizations throughout Lethbridge and southwestern Alberta.
We love to be able to award these grants into the community. We've seen a lot of challenges in the community this year in particular, as we still continue to come through COVID-19 and the pandemic. The economy isn't in the best shape right now. Community groups are starting to really struggle. We're hearing from some groups who are really having difficulties. So for us to be able to put this money back into the community it's so rewarding for us. It's so important for the community, and it's just one more piece that we can do to help keep our community strong and healthy.
Through generous donations, the Community Foundation has distributed over $1.2 million in grants throughout our region so far this year. New West Theatre, which has been struggling financially lately, is set to bust out the big guns with a new production. The group has started a fundraiser called Save Our Stage to help it keep its doors open. On Thursday, officials said they will be able to move forward with shows in our city thanks to the fundraiser. The company provided a sneak peek to the entertaining piece called Blockbuster that will begin on December the 14th. Video journalist Micah Quinn has more on the show-stopping performance by local performers here in our city.
Staff and performers from New West Theatre say you can expect laughter and goofiness from the show Blockbuster, combined with an in-depth look at artists and movies, along with comedy sketches.
We'll get a little visit from Mr. Johnny Cash himself. We've got some good old classic numbers, a little Dancing in the Street, a little Walking on Sunshine, maybe a little visit from a couple of movie musicals, Hairspray, Grease, Hair.
Officials from the organization highlighted that Blockbuster is a great way to spend some time with family during the holidays.
Please come down and support us. We would love to have you down here and just come and share a laugh. We're hoping to bring joy to this holiday season.
And it's only like 2 hours long. It's like the perfect show to bring the partner, or if the family's been around the house a little too long over the holidays and you need to distract them for a little bit, bring them on down. We'll take over the distracting for you.
The Save Our Stage campaign was started 3 weeks ago to make sure that New West Theatre can continue to operate here in Lethbridge. Staff from the theatre company say that the first phase of the fundraiser was a huge success, and they will be able to keep their doors open to astound audiences here in our city.
We're going to continue to raise money over the upcoming months to help eliminate a deficit, help rebuild some reserves. So your support is still very valued and needed.
Blockbuster will run from December 14th to the 31st at the Yates Theatre. And for more information on the show or to buy tickets, you can visit newwesttheatre.com. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Looks like a lot of fun. Cops, Pops, and Pizza. A law enforcement torch run fundraiser is set for this Friday night at Boston Pizza South here in Lethbridge. There will be police and military vehicles on display. Officers will be serving customers food, selling merchandise, including stuffed animals, and collecting donations for Special Olympics. Director for the Torch Run, Lethbridge Police Constable Braylon Hagan, shares a story of how events like this can really change the lives of those with developmental disabilities.
One of the events we had one of our local Special Olympic athletes attend, help out there, and from that event, he was able to get a job with the Boston Pizza South, and he is still working at the Boston Pizza South for the last 5 years. So it's a pretty neat story. It just goes to show the inclusion that we've seen in the last bunch of years. Everything from, you go to Tim Hortons, you go to Costco, you go to a lot of different places, and there are a lot of people that have intellectual disabilities that are employed, which is great.
Constable Hagan adds the law enforcement torch run has been ongoing for 41 years and has raised $950 million for Special Olympics around the world. The Lethbridge Hurricanes will be hosting their annual Toque and Teddy Bear Toss game this Friday night at the NMAC Centre against the rival Medicine Hat Tigers. This event has been ongoing for the last 26 seasons. When the Hurricanes score their first goal, fans are asked to throw their new Toques and Teddy Bears onto the ice. A member of the Canes family explains the importance of this initiative.
We actually took some players and spent time down at My City Care last night helping with gift wrapping and learn a little bit more about their organization and what they do there and how they support families who are in need with providing a gift for their child for the holiday season. They had supported 5,000 children up until last night, and they do expect to be supporting quite a few more. So I know they're in need of toy donations. We're very happy and fortunate that we can contribute to them in a little bit. And same with Angel Tree, just how they're able to help brighten up someone's holidays this season that might otherwise not have been the happiest one, maybe.
The team is hoping for over 5,000 teddy bears and toques to be tossed onto the ice at Friday's game. Residents of Medicine Hat got a chance to see the CP holiday train up close and personal late Wednesday afternoon. CP has 2 holiday trains which travel across both Canada and the United States collecting donations in support of food banks. The Canadian train departed Montreal on November the 27th and follows CP tracks west to Vancouver. This year's performers are Tennille Towns and Asanabi, while first-time holiday train artists Mackenzie Porter and Virginia de Vegas will finish out the tour departing from Calgary and wrapping things up in Vancouver on December the 18th. Well, the Chinook winds have brought us much warmer temperatures across Lethbridge, and the milder conditions will be staying with us for the rest of the week. Complete weather details are on deck. It has been quite a bit warmer across much of southwestern Alberta thanks to those strong Chinook winds. Angela Stewart is out at Popson Park in Lethbridge and has all of the weather details for us. Angela, we will be going through a bit of windshield washer fluid as the mercury continues to climb.
Yes, Hal, that's right. Load up on all that washer fluid as the warmer temperatures are going to be continuing for the next couple of days and hopefully melting all that snow away that we got last week. Clearing late in the morning for Friday, wind gusting up to 50 and a high of +2. Saturday, increasing clouds, +1 for the high. Sunday, -7 and cloudy skies. Expect periods of snow and -9 for Monday. Tuesday and Wednesday, a high of -4 and a mix of sun and cloud. The average high for this time of year is 0, so we are above that average. Our average low is -11. The highest temperature recorded back on this day was 13 degrees back in 1957. The lowest temperature was -37 back in 1977. The sun rose at 8:15 this morning and it set at 4:32, giving us exactly 8 hours and 17 minutes of daylight. Rain expected tomorrow on the coast, 6 degrees the expected high for Victoria. Vancouver will also experience some rain, 5 degrees the expected high. -8 and mainly cloudy tomorrow in Edmonton, the wind chill near -18. Shaping up nicely though in Calgary, -2 and sunny skies. To the rest of the prairies now, where Saskatoon will see some snow likely in the afternoon, the wind chill -19 in the morning, -13 for the afternoon, -6 for the high. Regina mainly sunny, the wind chill -24 in the morning and -15 in the afternoon. The high -8 for the day. There's a chance of snow in Winnipeg, risk of freezing rain in the afternoon. That can also make for some pretty slick conditions on the road, so just be careful on your commute. -6 for the high there. To the central part of the country now, where Toronto will be under a mainly cloudy sky for Friday, 2 degrees the expected high. Mainly sunny and -1 for our nation's capital in Ottawa, the high -3 in Montreal, with the wind chill at -13 in the morning and -7 for the afternoon. Sunny skies for the day there tomorrow. Fredericton, 3 degrees the expected high and a mix of sun and cloud. Halifax looking at some soggy conditions, periods of rain throughout the day, 7 for the high. There's the same picture in Charlottetown, rain and 4 degrees for Friday. Periods of rain and some fog patches in St. John's, 3 degrees the expected high. And that's a look at your full weather forecast from Popson Park here in Lethbridge.
Today's weather report is brought to you by Ridge Utilities, providing competitive rates for electricity, natural gas, and internet, while investing back in communities across southern Alberta.
TC Energy Corporation says it shut down its Keystone Pipeline after a leak was discovered in Nebraska. The Calgary-based company says it has mobilized people and equipment in response to the continued and confirmed release of oil into a creek located about 32 kilometers south of Steel City. TC Energy says an emergency shutdown and response was initiated on Wednesday night after a pressure drop in the system was detected. It says the affected segment of the pipeline has been isolated and booms have been deployed to prevent the leaked oil from moving downstream. The Keystone Pipeline system stretches more than 4,300 kilometers and helps move Canadian and U.S. crude oil to markets around North America. 3 years after it announced the concept, Cineplex launched the first of its new theater, dining, and entertainment complexes. The venues are called Junction. The opening in Winnipeg comes as the theater chain has been working to recover from the pandemic while fending off competition from on-demand streaming services. It includes 6 auditoriums with reclining seats, an arcade area with more than 50 games, a party room, live entertainment space, and dining options. Cineplex says another Junction is set to open next summer in Mississauga, Ontario. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 4 points on the day to finish at 19,969. The Dow was up 183 points to 33,781. The S&P 500 was up 29 on the day to 3963, and the Nasdaq was up 123 points to 11,082. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 21 cents to 71.80 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 21 cents to 5.93 US. Gold was up 16 cents to 17.8930 US an ounce, and silver was up a cent to 23.07 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $12.41 per bushel, barley's at $9.69, canola's at $19.42, and corn is at $11.61 per bushel. Live cattle were up 50 cents to $152.43. Feeder cattle January contract was up $2.58 to $183.15, and lean hogs were down 38 cents to $82. The Canadian dollar was even over the past 24 hours at 73.56 US. Recapping one of our top stories, the Alberta legislature passed the Alberta Sovereignty Within a United Canada Act. The final vote was 27-7. Premier Daniel Smith's UCP voted for it while the NDP were opposed. NDP leader Rachel Notley says if her party forms government next May, they will repeal the legislation. The act strips out sweeping powers for cabinet, but will allow Alberta to push back on federal laws or policies that negatively impact the province. You know, there are many in our Indigenous communities who are not opposed, but are in favor of Alberta energy projects. Coming up, we chat with Indigenous energy policy analyst Melissa Embarkey, who shares her thoughts. Listen, if you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you. Alberta Premier Daniel Smith and the UCP have been demanding an apology from the NDP and leader Rachel Notley, and it has something to do with Bill 1, or the Alberta Sovereignty within a United Canada Act. To talk about this in more detail is our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, who joins us once again from Edmonton. Tyler, why is the UCP wanting Notley to say she's sorry?
Well, this sort of dates back to the immediate aftermath of the bill being introduced. Bill 1, the very first bill that the UCP has introduced. And she seemed to sort of suggest that the federal government should intervene in some way and quash or veto the legislation, which is sort of this residual power that, the federal government could do it, probably won't. And Notley's kind of backtracked on it. And so they've taken another tack on attacking the bill, saying that, it will harm investment and this is a sideshow distracting from other issues and things like that. But it does put the UCP in the position, as you noted, of demanding this apology for Notley's response to the, what did you say off the top? The Alberta Sovereignty within a United Canada Act, which is a bit of a mouthful for all of us here.
Now, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says he's kind of taking a wait-and-see approach when it comes to the Alberta Sovereignty Act. What does this actually look like? And will the province and maybe the Trudeau Liberals end up in court?
Well, that's a good question, and we don't know just yet. It seems like the purpose of the act, to some extent, is to provoke the Trudeau government into taking Alberta to court and say, no, you actually have to do this or enforce this or follow this rule. But at the time being, they've said basically that they don't want to take any options off the table, but they're going to give it a wait-and-see approach. Of course, there are likely to be amendments to this. There are, it could fail. It's unlikely, but it could fail. And it might not even be used in sort of any substantive way for several months yet. So they're sort of keeping their powder dry. But you can imagine a situation in which Trudeau would love to have this fight, would love to scrap with the province over this. So I think we'll have to, I'm sure they are sitting in their strategy meetings in Ottawa, gaming out exactly how they could benefit from this.
And I could see political pundits saying that this would shore up support for both the UCP and Daniel Smith, their supporters, and as well for the Trudeau Liberals. What do you think?
I think that's true. The polling does not suggest sort of wild enthusiasm across Alberta for the idea of the Alberta Sovereignty Act. It's sort of a strange situation, right? Because you have sort of general discontent in the province about the way Ottawa has treated Alberta. You have had sort of periods of quite high alienation in the past few years, but that doesn't seem to totally be translating into like massive support for something like the Sovereignty Act. Obviously the support is very, very high among United Conservative Party supporters. It's a little bit less high among sort of Albertans as a whole, particularly in Edmonton, to a lesser extent in Calgary, and, it's most popular obviously in rural and small town Alberta. So it's going to be an interesting gambit, I think, to see how they sort of do what the party's base asked, while also not, sort of ticking off other voters who they need to vote for them in May.
Tyler, now the UCP actually brought forth some amendments in regards to Bill 1, the Alberta Sovereignty Act. What do they actually look like?
Well, they have to do with this what ended up being quite a controversial part of the legislation. When it was first announced, it basically was going to give Cabinet the power to unilaterally amend legislation. So what that would have looked like was, if the Alberta Sovereignty Act is invoked, if a motion is brought to the legislature, if recommendations for legislative change are made to Cabinet, Cabinet could then unilaterally go and change that legislation. That was really controversial. And that seems to be one of the things that the Smith government is walking back. They are now saying, no, there's going to have to be legislative debate on any changes to legislation. So that was sort of the big thing that is likely to change here. The other thing is that the bill sort of generally and vaguely, frankly, spoke about harms to Albertans. So the Alberta Sovereignty Act could be invoked in cases where there were harms to Albertans or Alberta's interests. But of course, what constitutes a harm? And so the bill is now likely to be amended to reflect more precisely what that means, such as violating charter rights of Albertans or, economic interests, things like that. So those, I think, are probably the two big amendments that we're likely to see that sort of came from, fairly sustained opposition from the official opposition, and also, quite a bit of feedback, I think, from Albertans to MLA's offices and things like that. So, I think we can probably fairly say that the process is sort of working as intended, although it's hard not to. I mean, a lot of critics are saying, no, this is a big setback for Danielle Smith. She's taking a climb down on this. Her first bill, she's having to backtrack these things. So, that's sort of what the pundits are saying. Does that reflect what regular people are saying? Of course, is a totally different question.
Now, a number of Alberta's treaty chiefs say they're actually united in their opposition to Bill 1, the Alberta Sovereignty Act. Tyler, now the government has promised consultations with them. Shouldn't this have happened prior to introducing Bill 1?
Well, that is a confusing thing. This seems like an obvious sort of place where the province would have thought, oh gosh, we need to consult with these groups. Because, of course, treaties are signed with the federal government. They're not signed with the provincial government. So the treaty chiefs are saying, this sort of tramples all over our sovereignty, our rights as communities. And so the Smith government has promised consultations, but so far there's no real sign of softening among the Treaty 6 chiefs, Treaty 6, 7, 8 chiefs, I think, all together. And they are in Ottawa this week talking about this at the Assembly of First Nations gathering. And incidentally, their sort of Saskatchewan compatriots are saying the same thing about Saskatchewan's Saskatchewan First Act, which is similar, although not quite as extensive as the Sovereignty Act. So this, I think, is going to be a sustained sort of other side of this story beyond the political maneuverings. There is this sort of genuinely real question about how Indigenous people in Alberta are going to respond to this and how it will affect them.
Jason Kenney resigned his seat at the legislature. Now, do we know what's next for the former Alberta Premier? Is he headed back to Ontario?
We don't. I asked for an interview and I haven't got it yet. But it wasn't unexpected, I don't think, that he would maybe leave politics after 25 years. It was perhaps a little bit unexpected that it happened sort of right as Smith was really revving up the engines on the first day back. But he sort of signed off with a lament for the state of politics, that he's worried about polarization to both the left and the right. Not a new statement from him, of course. He had been very outspoken against some of the more conservative elements within the United Conservative Party. But at this point, we don't know what he's doing next. I'm hoping to find out. But you have to think that maybe he's going to go lay on a beach somewhere for a bit after 25 years of nonstop work.
I know I would, absolutely. Somewhere warmer.
Yeah, exactly.
Tyler, the province announced a new deal with the Alberta Medical Association, and among other things, it means the potential for more rural physicians here in the province?
Yeah, I mean, this has been sort of part of the talk on fixing the healthcare system for a long, long time, trying to encourage more doctors to go to rural areas. There was this plan floated a couple of years ago where they were going to sort of force medical school residents to go where they told them to, sort of like the RCMP does. And of course, there were ugly contract negotiations for quite some time between Alberta's doctors and Alberta Health Services. Now, the thing that I would point out that is really interesting about this is there's been a change to a change. A couple of years ago, the Alberta government basically gave itself the power to unilaterally scrap the agreement between doctors and the province. And they are now, it appears, giving up that power as part of these sort of negotiations to try and, I think, sort of smooth over the relationship between physicians and the province. So big developments there. Of course, this is also happening at the same time as Danielle Smith has this doctor looking into, sort of wide-ranging reforms on the health system. So there's actually a lot happening on the medical front at the moment, and it sort of remains to be seen how quickly we're going to see changes sort of on the front lines, I think.
And the bottom line is we need more doctors in so many centres, including here in Lethbridge, such a shortage of doctors. Tyler, the UCP announced that 5 million bottles of children's Tylenol, acetaminophen, ibuprofen are coming to help shore up a shortage of kids' medication. And it's good timing since cold and flu season has begun.
Great timing, yeah. I mean, there's not that many parents in my life, but parents of young kids, I should say. But certainly this is a thing that's all over social media, parents sort of desperately looking for these sort of pain and fever medications for their kids. And it looks like Alberta is in negotiations with a Turkish company that produces the sort of constituent ingredients, I guess you could say, of medication. And they're hoping that these 5 million bottles will arrive within the next sort of few weeks here. Now, there is a hiccup, which is, of course, that Health Canada regulates the import of medications, and there's bilingual labeling requirements. So it remains to be seen how easily those wrinkles will be smoothed over, but certainly it does suggest that the Alberta government is moving, rather quickly on this file that is on a lot of people's minds right now.
Now, still with healthcare, the NDP has been hammering the government over the state of Alberta's hospitals. An example is a hospice for terminally ill kids in Calgary had to discharge patients so that staff could be redeployed. What's the latest from our Health Minister, Jason Copping?
Well, the latest is basically that they think that things are going to start getting better, that sort of the infection numbers of fever and RSV, which a respiratory virus that kids get, are starting to trend downwards. So hopefully the pressures will begin to ease. There's been a number of surgeries canceled. There's at the Calgary Children's Hospital, the Alberta Children's Hospital, I think it's technically called, they brought out a heated sort of ATCO trailer kind of thing to serve as a backup waiting area for the emergency. So a pretty dire state. And what we haven't heard is something like mask mandates. Of course, the government has said flat out, those sorts of things aren't coming back. But the health minister has essentially said that he thinks things are going to get better, and there's been staff redeployments, as you mentioned, to try and manage some of this. But still, I think, a pretty scary situation for parents of children.
Tyler, for the time being, adding the rights of the unvaccinated to the Human Rights Act has been shelved. Do we know why?
We sort of do. Danielle Smith has been asked about it, and she basically said that, look, this one change is not going to solve the problem. So not entirely certain what that means in terms of what other actions could be taken, but it doesn't seem like we're going to see legislation on that, in the immediate future. Could that come in the spring? Could that come as maybe a platform promise in the election? I think that's a possibility. But if people were hoping, for sort of immediate action on that, it doesn't seem like it's going to be happening.
Here's kind of an interesting story. Justice reforms plan to give weapons to the security team at the legislature. Now, Tyler, there are items in the justice reform as well, including making it easier to collect both spousal and child support. Tell me more.
Right. So some of the guards at the legislature are not armed, but there was a suicide at the legislature in 2019. And of course, everyone remembers the 2014 shooting on Parliament Hill. So the sergeant at arms sort of looked into this and sort of came back and decided and suggested that, actually maybe within sort of the legislative precinct, some of the security guards should get weapons who didn't already have them. So that's part of this justice reform bill. The other thing on spousal and child support basically seems to, the attempt is to make it easier to collect these payments sort of across jurisdictions, across provinces and things like that. So, pretty unobjectionable, I think, in a lot of ways. And I don't have kids and haven't been divorced for that matter. So, it was surprising to me actually that that wasn't already the case. But certainly it'll be interesting to see what impact that has on folks in the months and years ahead.
Have you also heard of the talk of a potential of an early election? Or are we still headed for May of next year?
As far as I know, May of next year. Smith has sort of committed to sticking with the schedule. The issue that did sort of arise was the idea that they could sort of skip the fixed election date altogether and instead hold the election in the fall, which would sort of violate the fixed election date rules, but would be sort of legal / constitutional. But she's committed to sticking to that. The thing that is on my mind a little bit about it is where Easter falls on all of this. Easter, I think, is April 10th or 11th, and the election needs to be held on or before, I think it's May 29th, 2023. So, does it make sense to move the whole thing up earlier? Does it make sense to, run an election campaign over Easter? My thought would be no, and that you'd have sort of maybe a 6-week or a 5-week campaign after that. That makes the most sense to me. She's committed to sticking within the parameters of that, but certainly no rumbling rumors yet of, an early election or something fun like that.
And what do some of the latest poll numbers show in regards to popularity with the UCP and the NDP, and as well with their leaders, with Rachel Notley and with Premier Danielle Smith?
I haven't seen a ton of polling lately, which could just be that I've missed it. But right out the gate, Danielle Smith was sort of trailing Rachel Notley, and that sort of, and she had a pretty rough, first week or two on the job. I would suspect that the poll numbers have sort of smoothed out slightly, but I do think that something like the Sovereignty Act, which, as I mentioned, does not have the maybe overwhelming support one might have anticipated, will sort of move those numbers around a little bit. And of course, from the NDP perspective, it's going to matter how they play this. Are they going to fall into the trap of being accused of being part of the Notley Trudeau Singh alliance again, or are they going to cast themselves as the responsible government in waiting? So there's some questions, I think, on strategy that are really going to inform some of these poll numbers in the weeks ahead. And of course, I mean, I know I'm rambling on here, but the other thing is the hospital situation, of course, and whether this government can get a grip on it, because the polling from earlier in the summer did show that things like affordability, things like healthcare were really, really top of mind for Albertans. And so that's going to be, if there's a place for Danielle Smith to make up or lose ground in the polling, it might be on some of those bread and butter issues.
Yeah, hot button election points, healthcare, education, and affordability, right? The cost of inflation. He's our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson. Thanks so much for joining us today from Edmonton.
Thanks for having me, Hal.
The narrative that all Indigenous communities are dead set against pipeline projects and any natural resource development may not entirely be true. Rather, Indigenous groups wish to have a stakeholder seat at the table when making plans for building through their land. Now, our guest today has a keen perspective into both sides of the topic. Melissa Embarkey is a policy analyst from the Macdonald-Laurier Institute and joins us now from Edmonton to discuss this in more detail. Melissa, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thanks for having me, Hal.
You bet. Now, what do you wish all Canadians knew about Indigenous people's perspective on natural resource development? Put aside some of those misconceptions right away.
One of the biggest misconceptions is that we're against oil and gas and pipelines and pretty much anything to do with the natural resource sector. And that is absolutely not true. I've worked in the industry for 15 years. There are countless employees out there who've been in the industry, either in the trades, whether it's engineering, whether it's in land reclamation. We're working in this industry, and it's made a it's been a career for all of us, especially if we've come from poverty. It's given us a way out of poverty to make a living and to be able to support our families.
Now, what are your thoughts on the cancel culture and the twisting of information or even the narrative as it relates to Indigenous people having a voice at the public policy table?
We're only brought to the table if it meets a certain narrative. So if there's an anti-pipeline narrative, they'll only bring Indigenous people who fit that narrative and who speak that narrative. They don't bother to go back to that community and pull the members who actually want this project in their area, who actually want this project, bring this project to their communities, because it not only brings economic benefits, but it helps them address social and economic issues that we all have in all of our communities. And it's one way that we can pay for our own water. It's one way we can pay for social programs, children's programs, youth programs. We couldn't do this without some sort of economic generator in our communities. And this is the one thing that's lacking when it comes to policies, that they miss the opportunity to speak to the other side, because we come with solutions, we come with options, and we also come with ideas on how to change or upgrade existing facilities. This is where environmentalism gets it wrong, is that they don't include the voices that can actually bring change to this industry.
Now, you touched on drinking water for a second here, Melissa. Let's talk a bit about that for a moment here. What needs to be done to really get this issue resolved, that there's fresh, clean drinking water in many reserves across the country?
There needs to be motivation. If you look at just a very basic oil and gas operation, they set up camp somewhere, maybe a camp of 100 people. Within a week, they'll have a water system set up, they'll have a sewer system set up, they'll have a housing unit set up, and they'll have this ready for employees to come in. This can be done on First Nations communities. It just takes motivation more than it does money. If you go in and you identify the issue right away, you fix it right away before the issues become bigger, then you've saved yourself some money. But the government just absolutely does not want to help us. They let these issues sit for some for 40 years. Like some of these issues are older than I am, and they've just recently been resolved. Like there was one community in BC that finally got clean drinking water after 42 years. Like that is just crazy.
So it's not just the Trudeau Liberals that a lot of people have been blasting. It goes back many generations or many different governments, right?
It does because there's a broken system within the federal government, and we've been trying to address this with the federal government. You need to take out all those middle layers. You need to take out the red tape. You need to take out all the people in between, and you need to allow First Nations communities to go directly to a source that can provide them or help them with water. And I worked with a county, and I was quite surprised that we were able to get a whole county potable water with pipelines installed, with water treatment plants. We were able to get thousands of people and businesses installed within 4 years. And after this project, I was completely shocked that we can't do this on First Nations communities.
Let's talk about why you feel it's so vital to have a strong Indigenous voice at the seat of the table, especially when it comes to policy change. Why do you feel it's so important?
It's important to include voices like mine because we don't follow the status quo. We don't go with the narrative. We come up with solutions. I have people that I've worked with for many, many years who work with environmental and water companies, and they have their solutions of what needs to be done. And the government just isn't listening because that's not the correct narrative. They want to throw money at the issue, but they want to address the issue right from the top and start looking at taking out some of these middlemen. And it's just not happening. And if it doesn't change with this government, we need to see change if we have a different government to see if they can kind of address that issue and to see if we're actually making progress when it comes to change on reserves. Because when I look at my reserve, it looks exactly the same as it did 20 years ago when I left it. So that's how we know progress is happening or not. We look at the change in our communities, and if there's no change in a decade, then progress isn't happening, and we need to start moving forward on certain things.
Now, you recently wrote an article about how new governance models on Indigenous communities could be a first step to solving some of the issues we see today. Can you explain?
Going back to the water issue, if we allowed First Nations to make these decisions on their own, to be able to contract someone to come into their community and be able to work with them directly, that would make things a lot easier. And this goes for everything, whether it's water, housing, child and family, whether it's infrastructure, all of these things are right now are out of our control. We have to go through the federal government first if we want to see change, if we want to implement anything in our communities. And that needs to end. That needs to stop. We need to start giving First Nations communities the right to make these decisions on their own and for their communities because each community is different. There's this misconception that we're all the same. Each community is different. We have different needs, we have different issues, and those need to be addressed by the people who are living there.
Let's talk about the opioid crisis, which many communities are facing across the country right now, not just in the big cities, but a lot of the Indigenous communities as well. What do you think is a good first step in addressing some of those addiction crisis issues that we see right now?
Well, we need to get addictions and healing centers. We need to get resources in place to be able to deal with this and to be able to handle it. Because what we're seeing is people leaving our communities and ending up in urban areas. Then it becomes a city problem. If we had our own resources, our own healing lodges, our own way of handling this opioid crisis, we would be in a lot better place and it would be less strain on other areas like cities. It would be a less strain on Edmonton, for example. And we would be able to take care of our members in our own community. And that would be a win for everyone. And there's no one solution to everything. I think the government seems to think there's one solution. Let's decriminalize something. That's not the answer. There could be five answers to dealing with this, and we need to start exploring them.
Different steps, absolutely, towards healing, recovery, and solving a lot of these issues. Melissa, where do you think the mainstream media gets it wrong in terms of properly representing a broad cross-section of Indigenous perspectives?
They they tend to go with whatever the popular narrative is. And if you're not part of that, then you're demonized. And that is doing such injustice to different voices out there. And it isn't just the Indigenous community, it could be politically. If you look at the way, some of these bills are being rolled out, it's a liberal focused agenda, but we're not hearing other political parties and their, issues with it. They're absolutely not entertaining those voices. And I think we need to stop that and we need to start working together and get it right the first time. Because what I find is that we push something in and then we're backtracking once it's in place. And let's just get it right the first time. Let's weigh all the pros and cons right from the start and let's start building something that works for all Canadians.
Now, you talked a bit about the bills. Let's talk more specifically about Bill C-21, the Trudeau Liberals' gun ban bill. Some of the potential changes include banning hunting rifles such as shotguns. A lot of those guns that farmers, ranchers, or producers use. And a number of Canadians have already spoken out against this bill, including Montreal Canadiens goaltender Carey Price, who's an avid hunter.
It started off as banning handguns, and that's what was sold to Canadians. How and where and when did hunting rifles get included in this equation? And by doing so, you're basically going against our treaty rights to be able to hunt. What else are we supposed to use? Our you start banning, 50% of what we used to hunt in remote areas, then what's left to use? Like how can we hunt? And that just infringes on the treaty rights that were set out, ages ago with no consultation from us at all. Nobody was included in these conversations, and nobody knows the importance of hunting. We rely on wild meat because the food prices are so high. For some communities, this is their food. This is what they eat during the winter. So essentially, you're taking away our food source without even consulting us, and that is just wrong on so many levels.
So what advice, Melissa, would you give to Canadians wanting to get more involved in civic engagement, but just don't know where to begin?
I think people have to start thinking outside the urban box. People need to start thinking, how will these policies not only affect me, but how will they affect people in rural areas? How will they affect Indigenous people? How would they affect Northerners? We have to start thinking about this every time a bill is passed, whether it's a gun ban or whether it's, a censorship ban. Like we need to have all voices in this conversation. We can't just go push acts through the government without consulting Canadians because it impacts all of us. And I think urban voters, urban members, they tend to forget about that. And, I think just a little reminder that, hey, this may impact someone up north will get a discussion going, and hopefully it does.
Speaking of a big impact, let's talk a bit about the carbon tax. As a policy analyst in the energy sector, what are your thoughts on this levy, the carbon tax, which is supposed to triple?
It's only going to come down to consumers. That's what it's going to come down to. And it impacts everything. People don't see the trickle down effect. If you start taxing, a corporation above you and that corporation provides a certain service, well, that now goes on to the service that they provide you. And people aren't making this connection. They think, oh, it's not us, it's businesses, it's, polluters, it's everyone. This tax impacts every single Canadian. And every time it goes up and every time it increases, you're going to see prices rise at the grocery store. You're going to see your gasoline bill increase. You're going to see your utilities increase. And this is the connection that I'm trying to make with Canadians. Like this impacts all of us. And it essentially comes down to what you pay every month. And a lot of people aren't making ends meet right now, and it's only going to get worse. Food banks are overwhelmed. Indigenous communities are trying to help their members with the price of food, like just the very basic things like food. And it's gonna get worse as it doubles and triples throughout the years. It's gonna get worse. And where does it end? And how do people survive? Are the $500 payments that the government are paying out, is that helping? Is it gonna help long term? So these are the questions that we need to start asking.
You know, and a lot of farmers, a lot of our producers use the natural gas to dry a lot of their grains, to heat their barns. You're right, it's impacting a lot of us, including here in southwestern Alberta. How does the public conversation around climate extremism hurt Canadians, in your opinion?
It hurts everyone. When you have an extreme group who are telling you you have to choose, you know, between heating your home or nothing, that's not an answer. We cannot just take out oil and gas out of our lives. That's not a solution. A solution is that we start figuring out ways to reduce emissions. That's a solution. What are some of the new technology that's coming out? Like carbon capture. You look at things like LNG. Natural gas is one of the cheapest forms of energy that you can produce. It's easy to drill, it's easy to produce. It's one of the easiest commodities out there, and it's one of the cheapest. So if you look at something like LNG and you look at protesters who are on the CGL line, what are you protesting? Like, this is one of the cleanest gases that you can use out there. There's byproducts of it that are being used. So what are you protesting? Why are you out there? Like, what is your issue? And oftentimes when I ask this, I don't get an answer. And I'm like, okay, well, you need to start asking yourself this before you go out and, join a cause that may not be what you think it is.
Yes, ask the questions. That's how we get educated. Melissa Embarkey, Energy Sector Policy Analyst and Outreach Coordinator at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Thanks so much for joining us today from Edmonton.
Thanks for having me.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks for watching.